You're after something. Is it revenge? Money? Or is it something else? You look good. A little rough around the edges, but good.
Heard about a job. Big shot gangster putting together crew.
I'm a driver, and I'm a flyer. I waited a long time for a shot like this. What do you think? Well, what do you know?
You got a line on a ship?
Yeah, I know a guy. He's the best smuggler around.
I heard a story about you. I was wondering if it's true.
Everything you've heard about me is true.
L3!
Let's go with a mean man's face.
Who are these guys? If you come with us, you're in this life for good.
You might want to buckle up, baby.
Here they come! Let me give you some advice. Assume everyone will betray you, and you will never be disappointed.
I got a really good feeling about this.
Since when do you know how to fly?
190 years old? You look great. Push it!
So glad we took this job!
Oh my gosh, it looks so good. I can't even stand it.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd road.
Just let it in.
Oh, Jabba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Oh, Jabba.
I am so glad you are with the show this week. Welcome to My Nerd World, and I'm your host, Jon Justice. Oh, I'm so excited now. Man, hat tip to Disney and Lucasfilm. I can't give them enough credit. Seriously, I can't. I wasn't all that hyped for the Solo movie. I really wasn't. And a lot of the reason why I'm hyped isn't even necessarily anything that Disney and Lucasfilm have done. I think some of it ends up being sort of just circumstance, and I'll get into that. But this trailer for Solo: A Star Wars Story looks fantastic. And what I love about it too is that it really feels as if Disney and Lucasfilm know that they have something really good on their hands, right? They're not going to put out a crappy product. They'll put out a controversial product. We know that with The Last Jedi, but they're not going to put out a crappy product. And even despite the turmoil surrounding this film, they've put out a trailer that doesn't give the movie away. And I would think that if they were worried about how this movie was going to be perceived, or if they were worried this movie isn't going to do well, that they would have really done a trailer that explained a heck of a lot more. But we really don't know the story, right? We know that we're getting we're getting the background of Han Solo. We know it's going to take place over a course of probably about 7 years. We know based off of one of the lines in the trailer with Chewie being 190 based off of how old he was in A New Hope, that makes it this movie, at least in part, taking place about a decade before A New Hope. And I really like that idea that we've got some distance between this movie and the events of A New Hope. And I hope that if this movie ends up being everything that we are hoping it's going to be, that means we may get some more Solo movies. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. But this trailer and the music, I mean, let me just play the music at the beginning of this is just absolutely fantastic. And I'm not going to go through a frame-by-frame breakdown of this. I'm just going to go through sort of my initial impressions, and we'll probably spend the next few shows over the course of the next few weeks leading into the movie talking more about this and other people's observations. I just kind of want to give you sort of my instinctive reaction to it. The one thing that I'll note is that if you weren't aware of this already, the beginning of the movie, or at least, I'm sorry, the beginning of the trailer takes place when Han Solo was much younger. We see a younger Emilia Clarke, a younger Kira, and so it appears as if in the movie we get sort of their relationship as potentially late teens on Corellia, which is where the Imperial Naval shipyards are. And you can see Star Destroyers in the very first opening shot in the background, and then you see one shot of looking up, very reminiscent of the shot that we saw in Rogue One of a Star Destroyer under construction with the conning tower actually being lifted into place. But I just wanted to play the music of the trailer here, just real quick. The beginning part of this is just fantastic. Oh, so good.
You're after something. Is it revenge?
And it's so different from Star Wars music that we've had before, right? And it's okay. That's good.
Or is it something else? You look good.
A little rough around the edges, but good.
Heard about a job. Big shot gangster putting together crew.
I'm a driver, and I'm a flyer. I waited a long time for a shot like this.
I'm already sold on Alden Ehrenreich. This is going to be a new iteration of Han Solo, and I know what I'm about to say might be sacrilege, but we also need to be open to this idea that Alden Ehrenreich could actually be a really good Han Solo, even as good, and I think there's potential for him to be better than Harrison Ford, and I only mean that from the standpoint of this is a character that's been written on a page that actors, now two actors, will be portraying. I think there's an argument to be made, and maybe not for fans like me or perhaps you that have been around for a long time, but for fans that haven't been around for a long time, that don't have that connection to the original Han Solo. I think for a younger generation, the millennials, and I'm thinking about Samantha, who works as the producer on my weekly radio show, how, she's only 22. Alden Ehrenreich could be the sort of a better Han Solo for her. I think we're going to forget the fact once the movie starts about comparisons between Alden Ehrenreich and Harrison Ford. I'm already sold on him just seeing this trailer alone. So I haven't even gotten to what's on the show this week. So here's the plan. We have a huge section of the show that'll be dedicated to the listener feedback. I'm going to get into more of that coming up during the listener feedback portion of it, though. And I'll explain this a little bit later on. But we will be keeping the podcast as one singular podcast for now. Plans for the future, but based off of your feedback, and I'll get into much more detail when we get to it, I'm going to be keeping the podcast as one podcast longer when necessary to include on the latter part of the show, the listener feedback portion of it. I do have a few items to talk about in regards to The Last Jedi that I hope to get to. If I don't, because I've gone on too long with Solo: A Star Wars Story, we will get into that again next week, because I do want to spend some time just sort of, again, going over my instinctive reaction of the of the Solo trailer before we get to the listener feedback portion of it. As always, talkshownerd@gmail.com. And I forgot to mention earlier that I do have a new Twitter feed. You can find me on Twitter at Jon, Jon Justice. And I mentioned this before, but I want to mention again. You can also find me now at My Nerd World. That's my new Twitter feed. I do a lot of my pop culture, Star Wars tweeting, especially NASCAR Sundays. I do the majority of it there. My personal feed will always be my personal feed, but I'm going to be utilizing My Nerd World more often at My Nerd World. So if you are on Twitter, please follow me over there and tell your friends and communicate with me there. That's another place where you can go and leave comments and messages for the podcast. Again, at My Nerd World on Twitter is where you can go and find that. There's a Facebook page too, but I haven't been very active on that, and you can find that on Facebook if you search for My Nerd World.
Think? Well, what do you know?
You got a line on the ship?
I love this music.
Yeah, I know a guy. He's the best smuggler around.
I heard a story about you. I was wondering if it's true.
Everything you've heard about me is true.
And Donald Glover as Lando is just nailing it.
L3!
Let's go with a mean man's face.
Hey, with these guys. If you come with us, you're in this life for good.
So there's a line at the end of The Dark Knight, and I could be getting this backwards, but it goes, he's not the hero we need right now, but he's the hero we deserve. Am I getting that correct? So yeah, Commissioner Gordon says he's the hero Gotham deserves, but not the one it needs right now. And I was going to try to make this equate to the Solo trailer, right? But, the Solo trailer, it's the trailer, that we deserve, but not the one we need right now. It doesn't really work. My point being is that Solo, a Star Wars story, looks to be the movie that we need right now. This movie looks like a lot of fun. This movie looks like just a fun romp, for lack of a better word. And it looks as if it doesn't have the baggage attached to it. And it really is going to be unique in that. Rogue One, love that movie. This, in my opinion, looks better, even though I love Rogue One. But Rogue One had baggage to it because of the attachments that it needed to have, because the story was the lead into A New Hope, right? And it's a war movie. So it's not exactly the most uplifting, even though there's funny moments in it. This Solo movie looks to me like exactly what the fandom needs right now. We need a good, fun Star Wars movie that doesn't have any baggage attached to it, that we can all just go and hopefully collectively enjoy together as fans without having to worry about the divisiveness in the fandom. Now, I'm fine with that. I adore The Last Jedi. But we also need diversity in our Star Wars experiences. This, oddly to me, reminds me the most of the original New Hope. I went back and watched A New Hope the other day, and it is really, it is, I don't know, amazing, fantastic. I use so many of these words all the time, but it really is, I'll say astonishing, because it is. It's astonishing to me how well that movie holds up. Especially when you consider it came out in 1977. I tossed in The Last Starfighter the other day, right, which was like 84, I think. And they're going to be doing, apparently, a remake. Gary Whitta, who did a bunch of writing for Rogue One, put out some concept art for The Last Starfighter. And it looks like they got the original writer on board. And if you've never seen The Last Starfighter, it's not good, right? It's got a bunch of really great elements, but it does this big leap forward where they use this computer animation. It doesn't really align with the rest of the movie, but they were trying something different. It's obvious that they didn't have a huge budget. It's got like all the paces in it and all the moments that a good movie needs, and the story is good, but it's not, generally speaking, a good movie. It's fun to watch for nostalgia's sake. When you go back and look at, even if you don't look at the special edition, if you just go back and look at the original Star Wars, it is astonishing to me how well that movie holds up. It really is. You put the special edition in, right, and even more so with what Lucas added. I'm a big fan of the special editions. But one thing about that original Star Wars that I think we don't talk about very often is how much fun it was. So Bill Moyer at the beginning of the newscaster, at the beginning of the Empire of Dreams documentary, he makes a comment about how Star Wars came out at exactly the right moment, right? The nation was cynical in the wake of the Vietnam War. You put it out too early, it's a kid's film. You put it out too late, it's Buck Rogers. It lands right at a time in the country when we needed some escapism. I think that Solo, a Star Wars story, and this is where circumstances come into play, not necessarily planned. Maybe it was. I'm not sure how much thought Kathleen Kennedy, the story group, Bob Iger, Rian Johnson, I'm not sure how much thought those individuals put in to how divisive The Last Jedi was. Maybe they knew that. And maybe they knew that it was going to be divisive, but they needed it to grow the saga portion of the franchise, and that putting Solo, a Star Wars story, out 6 months after The Last Jedi was totally and completely intentional. I can see why now they didn't bother to push it to December. I think that this movie coming out 6 months after The Last Jedi and all the controversy that was attached to it, regardless of how you feel about The Last Jedi, I think this was a brilliant strategic move. Because I think right now in the fandom, and I'll speak for me as an individual that loves The Last Jedi, this is exactly the kind of movie that I think we all need right now. Because it looks fun. It looks like a New Hope with a Western with Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it makes sense considering that Lawrence Kasdan directed it. It's not going to have the baggage of having to go through and change anything in regards to the deep mythology of Star Wars. It looks just like a fun romp. And again, A New Hope was fun. A New Hope had the Force in it. A New Hope had, Jedi speak and Darth Vader and all that. But if you go back to that original movie, it certainly wasn't the focal point. It was about this hero's journey and Luke Skywalker, but these friends coming together to go on this grand adventure. It had humor in it, and that's what this looks like. This also looks just visually stunning. It looks, I was looking at some screen grabs. As a matter of fact, I have some here right now. I'm looking at some screen grabs from the trailer itself, and it looks just visually fantastic. I mean, can you tell how excited I am about this movie? I was kind of excited on the other trailers, and I've been watching the other trailers. There's a supercut of the first two teaser trailers, but this trailer here has just absolutely got me 100% sold.
You might want to buckle up, baby.
Here they come! Let me give you some advice. Assume everyone will betray you, and you will never be disappointed.
I got a really good feeling about this.
Since when do you know how to fly?
190 years old? You look great.
Push it!
So glad we took this job!
Oh. I am so absolutely ready for this movie, and I love the Western vibe that it seems to be evoking. It's just especially, I'll just play it one more time. We won't play the whole thing. Just the opening music to the trailer, I just dig it so much. Yeah. And I really hope that this is indicative of the way that the soundtrack is going to go. I really hope that they switch it up and they make it something different. If you're going to do it in a movie, it's going to be Solo, a Star Wars story. I think this really provides a great opportunity for us to start going through some transitions when it comes to our expectations of these movies, to really open it up to what a Star Wars movie is, what it can be, and just how the range at which we can go and switch things up while still making it inherently Star Wars. And Rogue One did that a bit. I thought bringing on Michael Giacchino. And we say his name wrong. Michael Giacchino. I'm really a big fan of his. I really like him a lot. I'm a big fan of Giacchino. And I thought what he did, given the short amount of time for Rogue One, was spectacular. But I do think that it's time that we really start to get used to this idea that apart from the saga films, we're not going to have, John Williams with us, and we need to be able to sort of expand what we're used to. And Rebels has done a very good job with that. I think that the Clone Wars did a very good job with that from a musical standpoint. And it certainly seems like if that's the type of soundtrack that we're going to be getting from Solo: A Star Wars Story, that we're going to be taking that next step that'll open up this idea of what Star Wars is from a visual standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint, and from a musical standpoint. And that trailer alone, and I'll reserve full judgment until I go and see the film here in a little less than 2 months, but I was not necessarily leaning towards wanting more spin-off movies, Star Wars Stories movies. I'm really excited for the Rian Johnson trilogy. I'm really excited for what the Game of Thrones guys are going to be doing. But I wasn't 100% sure whether or not, one, I ever wanted a solo movie, for crying out loud, or two, if I wanted any other spin-off movies. Now, I'm kind of legitimately excited for the opportunity of what we might be able to get with this. And if it's really good, I'd be down for more Alden Ehrenreich solo adventures. And given that timeline, as I mentioned earlier, I do think that that's part of the reason why we're going to have some distance there between the end of this movie and the beginning of A New Hope, because there'll be a good 10-year gap that we can probably go in and play in. So we know that we're going to probably find out, and we may have even seen it in the trailer. There's a moment at the end of the trailer when Han is pulling Chewie while they're on the train, and that rock's coming up. Obviously, Chewie doesn't get killed. But maybe that's the moment where Han saves Chewie, and Chewie has to give him the life debt. We see Chewie with what we assume is a female Wookiee, which could be his wife, which will kind of make the Star Wars holiday special canon, because that was the first time. It's either Nala or Mala. I think it's Nala with an N. I could be wrong. It's either Mala or Nala. That could make that canon, right? Which would be heartbreaking to see him say goodbye to his wife. We see him handed his famous blaster. Looks like Beckett ends up giving it to him. I don't think Beckett's going to make it out of this thing alive. The thing that I am looking forward to, one of the things that I'm looking forward to the most, apart from Emilia Clarke, because I like Emilia Clarke, and I'm going to be totally honest, she's incredibly easy on the eyes, right? Khaleesi, come on, give me a break. She looks fantastic. She looks great in this trailer, and I like her as an actress, too. If you've never seen Me Before You, again, that hopeless romantic of me, talk about a tearjerker. She is great in Me Before You as well, but I'm a big Emilia Clarke fan. She looks great. But one of the things that I'm really looking forward to is we are supposed to find out why the Millennium Falcon looks fantastic and so different in the movie, and why afterwards we see it as we know it. So it's supposed to go through, obviously, something rather tumultuous in the process of this movie to have it end up looking the way that it looks, which would lead into the meaning of Lando and The Empire Strikes Back. Hey, what have you done to my ship? Your ship. Hey, you lost her to me fair and square. I'm looking forward to finding out what actually happens to it. My theory, by the way, is it ends up underwater in some way, shape, or form. Now, we know that a part of the movie takes place on Mimban, and Mimban was originally referenced in Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which was the sequel to A New Hope, the novel that was written that was tossed aside once we started getting The Empire Strikes Back, so it's not canon anymore, but it was originally featured in there. It ended up sort of getting repurposed in a number of different ways. It's a dirty, foggy, muddy planet. We have mud troopers in this movie. I'm wondering if the Falcon doesn't end up going through something horrible on Mimban that ends up causing all the panels to be gone, the escape shuttle at the front of it to be gone, and the whole inside of it to get flooded with something that makes it look all brown and dingy, because at the moment in the trailer it looks shiny and brand new, and I'm really excited to see how that ends up changing or what happens to the Falcon to end up making it look different. So I'm excited. I can't wait. And hat tip to, again, Disney and Lucasfilm, because this was a movie that I never thought that I wanted to see. I always knew I would. The trailers, I was never all that excited for it. And now I'm excited beyond anything that I thought I would ever be for this movie. And I'm excited for the fandom too, I'll be honest with you. I've grown a little weary, and you know what? We'll go ahead and spin off of Solo: A Star Wars Story and get to some other items on my list for the show this week. But you know, I've been getting just a little bit tired, even more so than before, of all the negativity.
This is not going to go the way you think.
Speaking of which, I saw a post, and I think it was on Twitter, right? And maybe I didn't realize this, maybe I just didn't think it all the way through, but are people really mad? Are people really mad about The Last Jedi because Luke didn't answer the call to adventure and go off and save the galaxy? Is that why people are mad at the Luke? I mean, I've heard a few different things, but I saw somebody post about that was the reason why, one of the reasons why so many people had such a beef with The Last Jedi, is that Luke would have never acted that way. He didn't answer the call to adventure. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, I couldn't disagree more. I think that's exactly what would have happened to Luke, given the circumstances of what ended up taking place. And I don't know. For me personally, people can think whatever they want to think. But for so many individuals who are mad about The Last Jedi, and specifically those that get mad at you and me who actually like The Last Jedi or love The Last Jedi and tell us we're wrong, I don't think those particular individuals think beyond their desire to have their headcanon come true. In that, did you really stop and think about what that would actually mean if the movie went the way that you said it was going to go, and what that would end up doing to the original trilogy and what it meant for Luke? I just, maybe I'll get into more of that a little bit later on when we get to the listener feedback portion of the show. But I read that and I went, is that why people are mad? Because Luke didn't answer? I don't get that. All right. There was a rather interesting, a couple of interesting news items this week. One, speaking of Rogue One, Tony Gilroy, who came in to do the cleanup writing and some directing on Rogue One. And there was an interview in the Hollywood Reporter, I believe it was. And I'm getting this quote wrong because I don't have it here in front of me. But basically, Tony Gilroy said that when he came on to go and fix the script and the movie, that it was in big trouble. That it was a disaster, and the movie was in big trouble, and he was tasked with coming in and cleaning it up. And he was speaking to the fact that everybody had to die in the film, and that the way that they had played out the end of the movie wasn't working in his opinion, and that, again, the movie was in it was in terrible shape. It was in terrible shape. Well, in the same article, he also says that he's not a Star Wars fan, like at all. His job was to come in and to make this work. I really got annoyed at the comment because it seemed to lack context in as much as, was that just his opinion? That it was in terrible shape as a non-Star Wars fan? Like, as a Star Wars fan, if I had seen, or you had seen, what the original version of the ending of Rogue One was, being a fan, would I have been bothered by it? Would you have been bothered by it? Or did this guy, Tony Gilroy, come in, and was he just bothered by it because he's not a Star Wars fan and didn't really understand what Gareth Edwards was doing, and therefore, in his opinion, it was in terrible shape? And I put this kind of on the article writer because, in my opinion, a good journalist would have asked him to clarify, because that statement kind of seems like a slight on Gareth Edwards, in my opinion. I was kind of personally annoyed for Gareth Edwards because I thought the comment was unfair, especially since we don't really know exactly how the end of that movie was supposed to play out. And so to have him go and say, well, it was in a horrible, terrible, terrible shape. They were in a bad way. And it almost comes off as, well, it's a good thing I was there to go and save the day. And that may have indeed been the case. There's a part of me that wishes, and I know we're not going to live in this world anymore, there's a part of me that wishes that we could adhere to rules prior to the internet and never hear about this garbage. How great would it be to have these movies come out and just let the marketing play? I mean, I remember back when that was the case. I remember going to the library to get a magazine to see the first photos from The Empire Strikes Back. I remember going to the library again to see the first photos of Return of the Jedi. And it was a shot of the Star Destroyer with the Death Star 2 still under construction in the background. And my mind going, is that the original Death Star? And it blew up, but it didn't blow up all the way. Not grasping that this was a new Death Star that was being built. Think about if we had the internet back when those movies were being made. George Lucas essentially came in and kind of co-directed, if not directed, Return of the Jedi because they were having difficulty with Richard Marquand and it wasn't going the way that it was supposed to go. You'd have all the same stories written that you have about today with all these Star Wars movies, but everything is out in the open now, and I don't think that that's good for the fandom. Transparency isn't like politics. Or, movies aren't like politics in where you need transparency. That's the better way to put it. I'm kind of now getting a little bit more respect for J.J. Abrams for not being as vocal as Rian Johnson. Now, it's hard for me to say that because I love Rian Johnson and I love hearing from him. But I think there's also an argument to be made that he didn't have to go and defend the movie. And maybe in not defending the movie, the backlash wouldn't have been nearly as bad. Maybe if Mark Hamill hadn't gone blah, blah, blah about I had fundamental problems with the movie, there wouldn't have been individuals that felt motivated to go and criticize people like you and me for actually liking that movie. I'm speaking in such a way that this matters because it doesn't matter because it's never, ever going to change. But this is the kind of stuff that comes out when you have Tony Gilroy making comments about Rogue One, which is a movie that, for the most part, everybody seemed to really like across the board. I don't remember really reading any controversy about that. And it just seems like an unnecessary thing to say, especially without the proper context. All right. Now, that's not even the most controversial thing that happened this week. The most controversial thing that happened this week was Simon Pegg. Okay, so Simon Pegg, the actor, right? He plays Morrow in Ready Player One, in Spaced, in Shaun of the Dead, and Paul, right? And he played Unklar Plutt in The Force Awakens. You know who Simon Pegg is. I like me some Simon Pegg. I do. Simon Pegg's all right. I don't like how he bashes the prequels. That sucks. There's several people. Will Wheaton is one of them. Simon Pegg is another one. These guys within the fandom that choose to go. I think Gary Whitta has as well. They're entitled to their opinions. It doesn't mean that I have to like it. But Simon Pegg was doing an interview, and I think it was for Ready Player One, and basically said that the idea that he had, or what he was told, or what his thought was, that J.J. Abrams had something different planned for Rey's parents. And it wasn't what Rian Johnson did. That's essentially what Simon Pegg said. That according to what he was told, this was not what Rian Johnson did with Rey's parents, was not what J.J. Abrams had in mind. And of course, this just goes and stirs the pot of the vitriol in the fandom, and people start doing videos of, even J.J. Abrams didn't want, look, it happened, guys. It is what it is until he does 9 and it changes. It doesn't, I don't know how else to say that. At this moment, one or two things. Either what Rey said out of her own mouth was wrong, right? They were no one. Or Kylo Ren was lying, right? Filthy junk traders. Sitting in a grave in the Jakku desert. Sold you off for drinking money. They were nobody, right? Did a whole podcast on that last week. Was it last week? I think it was last week. Right? So, look, either he was lying and Rey was, misspeaking, or that just is the case. Get over it. I don't know what else to say. to say. J.J. Abrams has come out and he has said that he read the script and he really liked the script. And I fail to see how the story group and Kathleen Kennedy and even Bob Iger and Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams didn't all powwow at some point in time and all come to agreement or at least agree on what Rian Johnson did. So, if that's the case, then we'll just wait to see how 9 plays out, and I'm fine with whatever they do. But again, Simon Pegg, you're not helping by stirring up the fandom and getting them all frothing at the mouth, thinking that, justifying their frustration with The Last Jedi. It's just unnecessary in my opinion, and I am totally fine if it turns out to be the truth of what Kylo said and what Rey said in the Last Jedi, even if it does go against what J.J. Abrams said and his wishes. Pablo Hidalgo from the story group put together a really cool thread on Twitter and basically said that what we have with the Star Wars universe and franchise right now is what George Lucas wanted. George Lucas, when he envisioned Star Wars and making the movies, and you saw it in the original trilogy, he envisioned Star Wars to be like James Bond, with various directors coming in to make these movies and to give put their own stamp on these different films, to make them different and to make them unique. What we see now within Star Wars and the creation of this content is what George Lucas always envisioned. This idea that they pushed aside his ideas and thoughts and everything else, I don't buy it for a second. I do believe that when George sold Disney and Lucasfilm off, or when he sold Lucasfilm to Disney, that he did strip away his ability to go and make firm decisions on the future of the franchise. But I also don't think for a second that Kathleen Kennedy would just go look at George and be like, no, we're not going to do that. This is his vision. This is what he wanted. He may not like what Rian Johnson does or J.J. Abrams does or what Lord and Miller were doing or what Ron Howard were doing, but the same thing could have been said and would have been said if he was still in charge of Lucasfilm producing these movies and had other directors coming in. If you don't think for a second that George Lucas wouldn't have allowed some creative freedom for directors coming in, even if it was stuff that maybe he would do differently, I'm sorry, I completely disagree with you. Star Wars still has a shadow over it, and a positive one, of George Lucas. And that's a good thing. It is a good thing. And there's a bunch of great people within the Lucasfilm and Star Wars community that have plenty of ties to George Lucas to where they can reach out and talk to him. We know that Dave Filoni of Rebels, right? He was a student of George Lucas. We know that George Lucas, according to the director and the Jedi, called up Rian Johnson, and they had a conversation. And don't think for a second that he's not talking with Kathleen Kennedy. And for crying out loud, Ron Howard was his friend and was potentially supposed to do other Star Wars movies. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Willow is a Star Wars movie. And I guess, who am I speaking at? I guess I'm speaking to again, that portion of the fandom that is upset about Star Wars. I can't help you, and you just need to get over it and go watch, Star Trek movies.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, before we get to your listener feedback, which we've got to spend a lot of time on, a few more Solo a Star Wars Story details. There's a big Denny's promotion. If you guys missed it, a whole bunch of podcasts cover it. They did a big Denny's event last week on Monday where they released a whole bunch of different images, character images from the film. They're going to have food-related items that'll be promoting Solo, a Star Wars Story. Therm Scissor Punch is one of the characters, and I love the name Scissor Punch. It really, there's so many different character names that really evoke that little kid in me and those original action figures that were more literal than the names we get now for characters. Hammerhead, Wolfman, Snaggletooth, and now we got this guy Therm Scissor Punch. I dig that. It's just really, that's that part of Star Wars that I'm glad that they are sort of throwing their arms around. it is a bit absurd, but, Star Wars is a bit absurd, and that absurdity really lends itself well, and I think will do the franchise a lot of good moving forward and continuing to bring in new fans because they'll gravitate towards that too. We found out that one of the bad guys that's most prominent in all the promotions so far, her name is Enfys Nest. She is a she, and I think that's really cool. I think it's cool that we've got, apparently she doesn't have a huge role in the movie. She only has a role in a portion of the movie. So probably more akin to, say, like a Jabba the Hutt type character where they're prominent, but they're not in the entire film. But it was really cool to read that she was, that Enfys Nest was a female. I dig that idea. Not from a diversity standpoint, but just because I think females make really good villains too. And if they keep her behind the mask, I find that really fascinating that they decided to go with a female bad guy that ends up staying behind a mask. I think that's really cool. One more quick thing on Solo, and this was before we actually got the trailer, and that is, it is going to debut at the Cannes Film Festival in France on May 15th, so about a week before it comes out in the theaters. I don't think Disney would be debuting this movie if they didn't have some faith in it. Now, that being said, Attack of the Clones did also debut at Cannes. However, I like that movie. But be that as it may, Attack of the Clones did debut there as well. But we're also in a much different social networking environment than we were back when Attack of the Clones came out, and I honestly, again, don't think that if Disney didn't have faith and trust that this was going to be a good movie, that they would be debuting it at such a prestigious film festival. Now, it's not in competition, apparently, but it will be debuting there, and we'll certainly have, some word of mouth on what people think coming out of that so about a month from now, some people will have some eyes on the movie, and we'll get our first reactions from the film. And quite honestly, I can't wait. And again, I am 100% sold on this movie. It's what the fandom needs. I'll say it again. I think we're in for something really, really fun. Glad that they're putting it out so close to The Last Jedi, and I can't wait to see the combined sort of vision, because we know that a part of this will still be Lord and Miller, but what Ron Howard was able to do to this to do to this script and this movie, I really have a lot of faith and trust in him because I think he's a true fan and he's a really good guy, and I think we're going to be able to see that manifest itself up on screen. So, man, I'm just really, really excited.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I have. It's your feedback to my Nerd World and the Star Wars podcast. And again, as always, thank you so much for reaching out to me. It is one of the, if not the thing that I look forward to the most every week, is being able to respond to your comments and your questions. Again, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can drop a comment on YouTube, on Twitter as well, at Jon Justice. You can find me on Facebook. But again, talkshownerd@gmail.com. First off, to the question I posed last week, and thank you to everybody who responded on how we should handle moving forward when it comes to the podcast. Should it be two separate podcasts, one that's news and commentary and one that's all listener feedback, or keep it all one podcast? And the majority of you reached out, and there's a couple of emails that I'll be sharing with you this week in regards to this. But a couple of you, many of you reached out, and the majority of you wanted me to keep the podcast as one, with the listener feedback portion with the rest of the show. Did get a handful of people that were down with splitting it up into two, but because of the level of feedback and the time that I've put into thinking about it during this week, before this week's show, I am going to go ahead and keep it to one podcast. That'll include, at the latter half of the show, the listener feedback part of it. And that was one takeaway that one of you had emailed in and said, just keep it where it is. People that don't want to do the listener feedback don't have to listen to it if you keep it in the second half of the show. So that's what I will continue to do. The first portion of the show, just like this week, will be news and commentary, all surrounding Star Wars, and then we will handle the listener feedback portion of it on the other half of the show. So thanks again to everybody who responded. Your feedback was really, really helpful, and it was nice to kind of get an idea of where everybody was landing and what you guys would want to see for the show moving forward. And like I say, I do have plans for the show down the line. And this is way down the line. I have no intention of stopping the show. I want to expand it with all of the projects that are in the works. There's going to be so much ability to, or so much material to comment on, that I'm really hoping that if everything works out the way that I want it to, that I'll be able to expand the show, maybe bring on some other voices, so that there is, a podcast available for all of the different stories that are going to be told within the Star Wars universe. That'll be too much to cover in one singular podcast. But let's go ahead and get to the listener feedback for this week. And we'll start off with Alex, who wrote in and said this: I could honestly see Rian Johnson modeling Luke after George Lucas post-prequel era, with Kylo playing the role of the angry fanboy who hated him after using his instincts, which George used when making the prequels. And I think what Alex is driving at there is this idea that Ryan sort of, modeled Luke now in The Last Jedi on how potentially George Lucas must have felt, right? Sort of, and then going and isolating himself. Just, I'm done with this. I'm done with the galaxy far, far away. And that Kylo was representing the angry fanboy. Like I said last week, art imitates life. Life imitates art. These parallels and these comparisons that we make within the Star Wars universe in the storytelling, and then with the people that are involved in the storytelling, I think it's just all circumstantial. It just the way that this stuff works out, there happens to be a lot of meta going on within the fandom and these movies too. And it's kind of always been that way, but because of the fact that we do live in, and we're going to get into a little bit more of this with another listener email, but we do live in this world where we now have the ability to communicate our opinions on a moment's notice to everybody. It ends up creating more opportunities for conflict and for division. I spent almost an hour of the weekly show that I do, the news talk show that I do here in Minneapolis this week, talking about the course of the past, we'll say 10 years, and I will not get into politics. I'm just using this as an example. How things have drastically changed in the past 10 years when it comes to social networking and the media's reaction to it and our reaction to it. It's clear in politics that as a society we have not caught up to how we are going to ultimately deal with the ability to read so much commentary and comment from individuals, whether it's on Facebook, on Twitter, within the news. And that rings true when it comes to pop culture as well. These controversies and these divisions, let me put it this way. These controversies and these divisions that we see within Star Wars, I'm convinced they've always existed. But we were living in a time now where voices are heard much more often than they were when the other controversies erupted. If, like we said last week, Rian Johnson had talked about it. The Empire Strikes Back was released today. Can you imagine what the fallout would have been if The Phantom Menace, which is already, sort of very divisive within the fandom, even though I love it, can you imagine if we had the level of social networking and internet that we have now back when The Phantom Menace came out? I mean, it would have been insane to read all the coverage. So I see what Alex is driving at, but I also think a lot of that just happens to be circumstantial. Let's go to Jana Kolka, who writes this. Thank you again for responding to my comment. She goes on to say, as a Christian woman, I totally agree with you that our society is definitely over-sexualized. But that's why I think myself and others love Reylo so much, because it's the subtlety and the mystery of it that's so intriguing. It's not so blatant and in your face. They may be attracted to each other physically, but clearly it's so much deeper than that. And that's not what their intimacy is focused on. It's the mental and emotional connection. And I think it's been done tastefully and organically. And hopefully it always will be within Star Wars. And I won't go and repeat the commentary that I did last week using the example of, say, Game of Thrones. But it really is, in its simplest form to what Jana is saying, it's that less is more factor. It's that emotional connection. It's the emotional connection along with the potential for intimacy that ultimately heightens the effect of these two particular individuals. You know, if you just get and this will never happen most likely, but if you get a Ben Solo and Rey, hey, we're hopping into bed, and then the flashback to the next morning kind of scene, it strips away the tension, right? And it doesn't make it quite as enjoyable. And again, I'll just simplify it, the less is more aspect of it. And it is a problem within our society. I'm a Christian as well, but you don't have to be a Christian to agree with that. And I don't say that Jana was saying that. I'm just saying that in general, I think most people, even if they're not religious, will admit that, you know, we live in an overly sexualized society. There's a lot of innocence lost, and especially when it comes to the big screen. You know, there's a reason why in shows and in movies, you know, they don't have the characters get together right away. They want to build that tension. Just look at Ross and Rachel on Friends for crying out loud, right? All right, let's move on. Let's see. Regan writes this. It's a short one. It just makes me laugh. Dear John, help me be strong. I'm watching The Last Jedi with a critic. Arg, ... So glad I have a new podcast to listen to so I can recover. Yeah, I thankfully I don't have to worry about it. My wife is amazing when it comes to not giving me a hard time for as much as I watch Star Wars movies over and over again, and she's also not overly critical, which is nice, and she enjoys these movies too. And I'll just repeat what I keep saying. I can't listen to these podcasts. No offense to them, but I can't listen to these podcasts that are negative. I'm really just getting tired of it. People are entitled to their opinions, and that's totally fine. But there's sort of a level of harping on this movie and complaining that I just can't stomach anymore. All right, let's move over to Claudia Maria. Writes this. You made my day. I was in class when I was listening to the podcast, doing preparation for my final, and when I heard you mention my comment, oh my gosh, thank you. And yes, I love your podcast, and I have followed you from when you started talking about The Last Jedi. Ever since then, they made me feel less alone, since most people around me sees The Last Jedi like I do. The Last Jedi is a work of art. First off, thank you so much for the comments, Claudia. I really do appreciate that. When I started the show, just as a quick side note, when I started the show, I wanted it to have some heart, and I say that in that it was deliberate, but I also say that just because I know me as a person, and I'm more of leading with my heart than I am with I try to use my head as much as I can, and basically just common sense. But I lead with my heart, and that's the one thing missing from so many shows. This is not to bash on any other Star Wars podcast. I'm not doing that. Everybody is different. I understand that. And I listen to a ton of podcasts. But in a world where we have dozens upon dozens of Star Wars podcasts to listen to, I personally found there to be a lack of one that I wanted to listen to that spoke to me through that emotional heart aspect. And so when I started doing the show, I really approached it from pure fandom. I want to lead with my heart because I care so much about these stories and this galaxy and this universe that George Lucas has created, because it's meant so much to me in my life. And I thought when I started the show that if I could just convey that a little tiny bit, then maybe I can separate the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast out from the other shows that are out there that are also very good, but that a lot of them just sort of do, here's your news, here's your commentary. All right, getting back to Claudia's comment here. The Last Jedi, work of art, with a deep and layered questions of mortality and morality. I'm happy to find that you saw The Last Jedi differently and not in a hateful way. I find these fans these days to be very aggressive without giving movies a second chance. There's too much group thinking going on in the social media, and it makes people with a different point of view afraid to express their opinion. I personally don't have any reservation about 9. I just want to be surprised. Whatever it will turn out, I'm sure it's made with a decision that's been thought through long and hard, and for the good of the characters and the good of the story. Good luck, my friend, and may the Force be with you. May the Force be with you, Claudia. And let me just address one more point in here, and the fans that are getting aggressive, not giving movies a second chance. I don't care what other fans do. Not a pushback on Claudia's comment, just sort of dovetailing off of what she said. Like, if another fan doesn't want to go and give The Last Jedi another chance, that's on them. I said it before. I'll say it again. I don't understand the aggressive nature of the fandom that want to criticize individuals who like this movie. And I can only speak for me, but if somebody wants to come and ask me why I like the movie and they don't, I'm happy to tell them. My goal is to not convince individuals to go and love The Last Jedi. That is on them. I feel bad for those fans. And if I'm repeating myself from what I've said in previous shows, I apologize. But I do. I feel bad for those fans that want to strip the joy from other people that actually like it. And you have to stop and think, and I know I do this. Where is that coming from? Well, it's coming from a place of insecurity on their part. They want to tear down that which you love because they don't like it, because they want to feel better about the reasons why they don't like it. We all like to have people agree with us, right? And it takes me, it's taken a long time, even in the 22 years that I've been doing radio, and it requires effort to stop and look at an individual who is being mean to you and try to think for just a moment, why are they being mean? Because oftentimes, I know for me, I look at it and think that it's my fault. What have I done? Am I being an apologist for Star Wars, right? All things being relative, but am I being an apologist for Star Wars? But really, when you go and look at it, that person that doesn't like the movie and can't handle you liking the movie, it's just because they're insecure. And I genuinely feel bad for them. It must be a bummer to be so insecure in your own thoughts and feelings that you have to go and tear down a fellow fan of something that you like, even though you don't like this particular aspect of it, that you have to go and tear them down just to make yourself feel better because you're so insecure in your own thoughts and feelings over something like Star Wars, for crying out loud. And I get why it's hard for people. This is a very cherished thing. Not everybody has the ability to express it outwardly or is comfortable in expressing it outwardly. But make no mistake, I'm passionate about Star Wars, and I'd like to believe that I'm able to express that. And people can say that's not masculine or whatever. I don't particularly care. It doesn't bother me. I'm very comfortable in who I am. But I think for a lot of people out there, they care for Star Wars as much as I do. They're not able to show it the way that a lot of people are, that I am, or that maybe you are. And when they watch a piece of Star Wars and it doesn't take them back to that joy and the love that they used to have because they've built it up so much in their minds, that's got to be a difficult thing for people to deal with. And it was almost to The Last Jedi's detriment that The Force Awakens was so successful. Like, The Force Awakens did such a fantastic job in resetting the saga films in the way that J.J. Abrams crafted it, that it was almost going to be impossible for The Last Jedi to not be this controversial. I don't think it matters, the decisions that were made. I think The Last Jedi was going to be divisive regardless. And look, if Rian Johnson didn't go the route that he did and ended up having Luke, as I was talking about earlier in the show, if they went the route of having Luke grab onto the call for adventure, which he'd already done. We're on the other part of the hero's journey, right? We laid this out. But if Luke had gone and done the call for adventure and joined up with Luke and gone and fought, Snoke and taken him out and all this, there would have been a segment of the fandom going, well, why? Why are we seeing Luke do all these amazing, awesome things now that we couldn't have him do via technology back in the original trilogy? And does that not diminish what he did in Return of the Jedi? You have Luke Skywalker pick up that lightsaber and go off to save the galaxy and face down the First Order, like legitimately. It kind of flies in the face when he throws the saber off to the side in Return of the Jedi. So you would have had a segment of the fandom that would have been ticked about that. So, Rian Johnson was the perfect person, in my opinion, to direct The Last Jedi because it was going to be divisive regardless. And Rian Johnson just seems like the kind of person that has the personality to where he's capable of dealing with that. I have an 11-year-old that's this way. It's amazing to watch my 15 and 11-year-old boys. Because they're very, very different. Logan is very threatened by his younger brother, and that only makes sense considering the fact that he's been around, being 15 and Kyle's only 11. He's been around longer. He was here first. Kyle's a little bit more even-tempered than Logan. So, Logan is kind of harsher on Kyle. Kyle's a bit mischievous. But of who is pushing around the other individual, it's the 15-year-old who's pushing around his little brother. But Kyle can totally take it. It just rolls right off of him. It doesn't bother him at all. He doesn't take it personally. He recovers quickly. He just has the temperament that makes it able to deal with. You switch those roles around. If it was Logan being the younger brother and Kyle being the older brother, Logan wouldn't be able to handle it nearly as well. And it's just amazing how that stuff works out. Rian Johnson was the perfect guy to go and deal with this movie. I don't think, let's say if Colin Trevorrow, just based off of the little information that we know about him and the reasons why he's not doing episode 9, that's the kind of person that I don't think would have been able to have handled the type of criticism that second movie, that episode 8, was going to receive. Especially when you look at his response to the critiques that he got of the Book of Henry, which did not do very well and people didn't like. And he responded kind of like, well, it was too artsy for people, or kind of went over people's heads. He didn't have that type of demeanor that Rian Johnson has. All right, let's go to Amanda. Amanda DeWeese writes this. Says some really nice things about the podcast. Capturing the heart of Star Wars, the fun, the thrill, the humor, the love of a galaxy far, far away. Thank you so much, Amanda, as always. Let's get into the meat of what she had to write this week. I will say one thing here about Reylo with the prospect of more Skywalkers / Solos. I, for one, am not a Reylo in that I ship Kylo with Rey. I ship Rey with Ben Solo. To me, Ben Solo is Han with the power of Anakin. He's the perfect merge of the traits and the flaws of the Skywalkers. Obsessively passionate, sensitive, romantic at heart. To the rogue like Han. In fact, Luke thinks this in the novelization when he sees Kylo on Crate, that he, Luke, would have been just like Kylo if Luke grew up not on a moisture farm, but growing up in the courts of his mother, Queen Amidala, and his father, a Jedi Knight. Snoke tells you the same thing in the novelization, that Kylo is just a mask, just a name, just an act, that no matter what Ben does, he cannot kill his heart, the heart of Han Solo. To me, Episode 9 will be the resurrection of Ben Solo with the catalyst of Rey, and the revelation to Ben that Kylo is not the makings of a man, that and that to grow up he must embrace the truth that is his family. Just my opinion, of course. We shall see. Smiley face. I think when Kira says to Han Solo in the Solo movie, we saw in the trailer, she will say something like, "I know who you truly are. You are a romantic," or something like that. Han thinks he's a scoundrel, and he is, but like all the characters, he's multi-dimensional. A great comment as always, Amanda, and I don't disagree. I'm not going to pontificate, or I'm sorry, not pontificate. do enough of that already. I'm not going to speculate right at the moment on what we're going to get in episode 9. I will speak to the Solo movie, and I'm very, very curious to see what the Solo movie does for the other movies. I think, well, I know, Solo, a Star Wars story, does have potential to add, as Amanda wrote, sort of the multi-dimensional aspect, other dimensions and aspects to these characters, and specifically Han Solo, that we haven't seen before. And where we don't have the saga aspect of the Force narratives, right? And those things in the saga films that we podcast about and that we spend tons of time dissecting. Just like with Rogue One, we didn't have those things. We're probably not going to have those things in the Solo movie. But what the Solo movie can do, And what it has potential to do is add not only more aspects to Han Solo we haven't seen before, but maybe even play into a bit of Kylo Ren in that way, and giving us some thoughts about Kylo Ren that we maybe haven't, and Ben Solo that we haven't seen before. I'm curious if it does that. It looks like I'm getting more and more, as I was, saying in the other part of the show. I'm getting more and more. I'm getting so excited for the Solo movie now. Now that the marketing is working on me now. We haven't seen a lot from the movie, but now that we're getting these posters, we're getting more images. We're finding out things like Enfys Nest being a female. That gets me excited. I just think that's a break from the norm. It has nothing to do with the gender equality or anything like that. I just tend to think that female villains and protagonists too, it's just something that we haven't seen as often, so it provides a really, really good opportunity for something new and different. And so I was excited to see that this Enfys Nest, even though apparently she's not a big core part of the movie, is a female character. I decided that gets me excited in the same way that Captain Phasma did. All right, let's go to Aunt Vesuvi. Aunt Vesuvi last week, I gave her a hard time because she got her grandmother a DVD, and I made the comment that she needs to upgrade her grandmother's, movie equipment and stereo equipment with a Blu-ray player. So Aunt Vesuvi writes this, LOL, since you mentioned it, my mother is a technophobe. I've tried to persuade her to upgrade. She won't have any of it. Thank you so much for reading my comment. Very kind of you. I also loved Ready Player One. Gosh, I've been toying with... Thanks for the comment, Aunt Vesuvi. I've been toying with doing a Ready Player One. I really probably should, just to get out of my system. I've seen that movie 4 times in the theater now. I love that film. It is so good. And I could watch... And I'm repeating myself, but man, I could watch an entire movie that is just Artemis inside the Oasis. That character is so great. Olivia Cook's ability to voice that character, the enthusiasm that she gives it, the interesting way in which she speaks and she carries her body language, man, it's just, I can so relate to Parzival in that movie. That 15-year-old in me, because I haven't really matured beyond the age of 15 or 16 mentally. That 15 and 16-year-old in me can just absolutely relate to Parzival and to Wade Watts in that movie and his affection towards Artemis. I mean, what kid of that age wouldn't be drawn to this super cool chick, right? It got me thinking, though, not to and we'll get some more comments here, but the Ready Player One aspect of it, and I actually thought about it before I started the show today, like where can Rian Johnson's story go, and what will he do in his trilogy, or some of these news stories? What are some of these tales that we can have that we haven't seen before? Man, I would love to see what I think George Lucas was going to do with the sequel trilogy in sort of these younger characters. I know you can look at Anakin and Padme as being younger, but I mean, I'd love to see some early Force-sensitive, Jedi-aspiring group of the equivalent of a galaxy far, far away high schoolers, right? I'd love to see a movie that had an Artemis and a Parzival and their friends in a Star Wars adventure with all of the drama that comes with that age group in dealing with Force abilities. The closest thing I guess you could equate it to would be like X-Men First Class. That gets me really excited. This idea that we have a group of young individuals, Force sensitive, that are working through this and maybe dealing with some threat. I think that's a really, really cool concept and something that lends itself to a larger series. I hope that Star Wars takes the same type of route that the Marvel Cinematic Universe does with bringing about these different types of stories into the Star Wars universe. George Lucas was very, very specific when it came to Attack of the Clones in that he wanted to add a mystery element to Star Wars, almost a film noir. And for as bright and colorful and visually stimulating as Attack of the Clones is, it really is kind of the closest thing that you get with this mystery of Obi-Wan Kenobi going and searching, to Camino to find out where the dart came from and all that. It really has that aspect to it. And I hope that moving forward we get more different sort of genre twists within the Star Wars universe. Like Solo. I mean, the Solo movie is supposed to be, as far as we've been told, more like a traditional Western type of feel to it. And certainly that's visually represented, at least in my opinion, in what we've seen with the color palette of the yellow in the marketing so far as being the dominant color for all the Solo materials thus far. But yeah, just to the Ready Player One thing, that movie's so great. Just classic Spielberg. I love that. I love that film. Ready Player One's going to be one of those movies, and then we'll get back to Star Wars. It's going to be one of those movies where I can't decide what I want to watch, but I'm in the mood for an adventure and sci-fi mood. You go throw Ready Player One in because it's got everything. It's got everything in it. All right, let's get to Misconduct 1. Let's see. Love your podcast. Perfectly happy with an over hour of it per week. It gives something fun to listen to on my 45-minute-a-day commute to work. This is by far one of the most positive Star Wars shows right now. It's in my top 5, up there with Scavenger's Horde, Who Talks First, with CT and Solo. I listened to that one, too. Den of Nerds, and the Rebel Scum podcast. Keep up the great positive work. You do... It's a long drive to Lost Hills. Thank you for the comment, Misconduct. Appreciate it as always. And I also appreciate the podcast selections. I'm not going to list off the shows I listen to because there's a couple of them that I stopped listening to. So I don't know why, but as of late I've become really, really fickle, and my patience has run out. That's kind of the problem with doing Star Wars podcasts, is that there's so many different options available that if there's one just turns you off, I was like, I'm done. I'll tell you just a quick story. One non-Star Wars podcast that I completely stopped listening to. One of the non-Star Wars ones that I listened to ID10T, which is the Chris Hardwick one where he does the interviews, with a lot of people. I don't listen to all of those. I just kind of pick out the interviews of the people that I like, or that I think might be interesting. I listen to the Collider shows, and Collider Jedi Council, which is okay. Sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's kind of eh. The era of The Last Jedi and the Collider Jedi Council has not been the most fun. I like Christian Harloff. I can't stand to listen to him complain about The Last Jedi anymore. I'm just over it. But one non-Star Wars podcast that I really got into, and now I've just turned it off, is the Slash Film Daily podcast. There's one particular host, and I won't say who it is, but there's one particular individual in that podcast. I don't think they like anything. And it's amazing how you can get a consensus with all the other hosts, yet this one person is always the contrarian. And it really feels like they're being the contrarian just for the sake of being the contrarian. And almost every single thing they talk about has something negative attached to it. I'm like, I'm done. If you can't see anything positive in any of the stuff that you cover as supposedly a podcast that talks about films, I'm not to say you can't be critical about movies, but man, at least like something. Okay, sorry. That was a rant. Back to Star Wars. Teeny243 says this: love your show and the content. Thank you. I think you should organize things the way in which you prefer it. Thank you for that as well. I adore that you take the time to respond to your listeners, and so it makes me feel like a natural part of the show. No, man, look, I'm glad that you guys respond. I have done the show with other people, and and I'll get to more of Teeny's comments here in just a second, but as a complete and total disclosure, okay, I find it difficult to listen to shows unless there's two people. Podcast. I like to hear two voices. There's a couple of shows that I like that are just one person, and they're cool. But a lot of times it just comes from the fact that there's not like a single person that I really, really like enough to hear by themselves. So I know that I run a bit of a risk of doing the show on my own. I've done the show with other people, and I had my two other hosts that I was doing it with for a while. And again, I've mentioned this before. One of the reasons why they haven't been on the show is just because they haven't been keeping up with the content the way that I have. And so a lot of times towards the last couple of episodes we did together, they were just kind of lost in what we were talking about, and time just wasn't working out. So I just decided to go at it alone. I would love one day to get somebody else to do the show with, but I'll be honest with you, I'm going to be super, super picky on who that person is. just because there's a level of the fandom that I want to be able to engage in, and it's tough to find a person that's at that same level that has the time to do a weekly show. That is part of my plans down the road, to hopefully find that person when I can nail down a more set time, and maybe there's a little bit more in terms of flexibility and finances where I can kind of afford to do a few other things with the show. So that's the reason why the show is currently just sort of a one-man band kind of thing. I do want to do interviews. That is also part of the equation. But again, because of my inability to lock down a specific time when I'm going to do the show, it just hasn't been conducive for doing that yet. All right, so back to Teeny243's comments here. Since it was mentioned in last week's show, the similarity between Kylo's proposal and the Darcy proposal in Pride and Prejudice. I've heard multiple times now that back when they were casting the role of Kylo Ren, they were looking for other actors in case Adam Driver couldn't sign on. They actually used lines from Pride and Prejudice in those auditions. Do you, or maybe someone in the comments, have any reliable source for that, or is it just a rumor? I have heard exactly the same thing. I have heard exactly the same thing, that they used lines for Pride and Prejudice to... Sorry, my phone just went off. I heard the same thing. I can't tell you what source it was, but I had heard that also. Several different places reported that when they did the auditions, that was the those were the lines that they used for the dialogue between those two characters. All right, and lastly this week, Edwin emails in, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Thank you for answering my question last week. I got the Blu-ray for The Last Jedi, and I've been trying to watch it as much as I can to catch things I may have missed. The problem is The Last Jedi movie is very long. It takes me 2 sittings to watch it. Plus, I have a family and little kids. We watch it together, but I also want to try to watch it for myself. I even try getting up earlier to watch the film in private, but it's so long I can't. It still takes 2 sittings, and by then, everyone is up. I'm thinking maybe I need to watch the film in 3 sections. Have any suggestions? I know it's a weird and nerdy question, but I just thought you may have an opinion on it. I know I have plenty of time to view Episode 9, but to view the movie before Episode 9, but I guess the real question is The Last Jedi too long for a Star Wars film? All right. I'm going to wipe out on this one. So, I'm going to wipe out on this comment. This will be this is the last section of the podcast this week, so I don't feel quite as bad by going off on a tangent, but I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent, and it's going to come down to how I watch movies and the difficulty that I have watching movies. This is going to be we'll make it official. We will call this
My Nerd World
Therapy Session for John. And we'll use Edwin's email to do so. All right, so first off, is Last Jedi too long for a Star Wars film? I don't personally think so. I mean, that's kind of a tough one to answer, right? I don't know what you can't take anything out of the movie without hurting it. And pacing-wise, if you try to just trim up scenes, it doesn't work. It is a long movie, and it is, because it's so long, it does make it difficult to kind of sit down and watch it all in one sitting. I totally get that. So, suggestions on what to do? The only suggestions that I would have is decide how it is you want to go and watch the movie and then watch it in that way. If you are watching it just for the sake of watching it to take it all in, then I would say sit down, treat it like you've gone to the movies. Put your iPad and your phone away. I'm speaking for me. Those are the things that are usually around me. Put your phone and your iPad off to the side. Act like you're going to the movies. Carve out time when you can sit down and just watch it front to back and don't stop it. I have to force myself to do that. I have a very, very weird routine, and I'll explain that in a minute. So before I get ahead of myself, I want to make sure that I finish wrapping up on Edwin's comment here. So decide how you want to watch it. If you're watching it because you want to watch a Star Wars movie and get into it and just allow yourself to sink into it and enjoy it for everything that the director has put forward on the screen for you. They intended you to watch it all in one sitting, front to back, and not be distracted, to be in a darkened theater, to not have anything to get your attention around you, then treat it that way. It's amazing how many films I have forgotten how much I love until I go and do that, and how many lost opportunities I have. Honestly, lost opportunities in watching movies, not just Star Wars, because I was screwing around on my phone or I was on my iPad. One, I didn't need to be on my phone or iPad. Two, it makes it better when I go to my phone or iPad for other things if I actually allow time to go by. And three, it's almost, in my opinion, at least for me, I feel like I'm doing a disservice to the director who made this movie. Now, that's not to say you can't just put something on the background and do work and leave it up and all that. I'm just saying for me and my enjoyment of films. If I'm sitting down to watch a movie, I really make the choice to sit down and to watch a movie. So if you're watching it just because you want to pick up on other little things, then split it up. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah, split it up into 3 sections. Carve out time to watch it and watch it in a section, or just throw it on and watch a particular section. I can't tell you how many times I've popped in the Force Awakens just to watch the Falcon chase scene on Jakku, or the saber battle between Kylo Ren and Rey. I've done that a bunch. So make a decision on how you want to watch it, and then go and watch it in that way. I am such a creature of habit that, like, during the week, I get home from doing my show, and it's any time between, 10 and 11 o'clock. I'm home early because I'm up at 2:30. I get all my stuff done in the morning. I usually take a nap, and I got a lot of time during the day to burn. I've got some projects that I'm working on, and one day you'll all find out about, and I hope that you'll enjoy when I'm done with it, but that's all I'll say about right now. So I have some projects, some hobbies that I've been working on for a couple of years that take up my time. But I play a lot of video games. I've got my NASCAR racing game that I play. I play a ton of Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2. I find myself having a difficult time watching a movie during the day in the middle of the week because that's my video game time. And yet at night, especially on Fridays and Saturdays, it's movie watching time. And I have no problem sitting down and watching and absorbing, movies. And I have to break myself out of the habit during the week to watch movies during the day because of the fact that it's such a habit for me that if I'm watching a movie during the day, I'm going, oh, but this is the time I usually play a video game and I'm missing out on video game time. My head has a hard time. My head has a hard time dealing with it in its old age, right? So, yeah, for The Last Jedi being as long as it is, it makes it difficult to sit down and watch it all in one sitting when it's 2.5 hours, but I wouldn't change it. And for going and watching the film and taking in everything you want, just make a decision on how you are going. I'm going to watch it this way and then go and watch it that way. That's what I have to force myself to do. And I'll be honest with you, this is where the therapy part comes in. I tell myself all the time, I need to go and watch something else. Even though I really want to go and watch Star Wars. And it sounds so stupid, right? If you want to go watch Star Wars, just go watch Star Wars. But there's something in my mind that just goes, oh, I've watched The Last Jedi every single weekend since I got on digital and Blu-ray. I can't go watch it again. And yet, right now, it's 1:30 on a Saturday afternoon. I know I'm going to watch Lego Batman with my 11-year-old later on, and I'm thinking about the movie that I watched later on tonight. And there's a part of me that wants to watch Suicide Squad because we're watching Lego Batman, and I kind of want to theme it, and I'm one of the few people that actually liked Suicide Squad, especially the director's cut. The villain in it was the cannon fodder bad guys in it, the transformed people from Enchantress. Those guys are lame, but I love the characters in that movie, and I like Jared Leto's turn as the Joker. But there's a part of me that kind of wants to go, yeah, I want to watch The Last Jedi, though, again, tonight. And the only reason why I won't is because I'm telling myself that I have a problem. But I think it's pretty clear I have a problem. This is episode 118 of the Star Wars podcast. For the majority of them, I talk to you, but by myself, about Star Wars for at least an hour. I don't know. What do you think I should do? I'm not asking you. I know what your answer is going to be. You are going to fuel my Star Wars addiction. And you're going to tell me to go watch The Last Jedi again. And you know what? I might just have to go and do that. All right. Hey, thank you so much, as always, for checking out the show this week. talkshownerd@gmail.com. YouTube, Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, iTunes, wherever you watch it. Leave a rating, subscribe to it. Tell your friends. Haven't mentioned that. Gonna mention it today. Please tell your friends. Share the podcast to other people. I don't probably promote it as much as I should. And it's been kind of growing on its own, but man, it would be really, really helpful if you guys who like the show shared it with some of your friends to help grow the audience even more. That'd be really cool. I'd really appreciate that. So we'll be back again next week. Maybe a Han Solo, a Star Wars story trailer to talk about. Maybe.
Let the past die.
No, we're not going to.
Kill it.
No, because I want to find out about your dad.
If you have to.
When he's young, so I don't want the past to die. I want to watch
That's
the
the only
Solo.
way to become what you were meant to be.
Well, we know what you think you were meant to be. Now we get to find out what J.J. Abrams thinks that you're actually meant to be. All right, I'm done, guys. Thanks again so much for checking out the show this week. We'll be back. We'll be back next week. And bye.
The Force will be with you always.
My nerd world.